Not all anger explodes. Some tempers wait. Some destroy quietly. Today we're counting down the zodiac signs with the scariest tempers, the ones you should never provoke. 6. Leo, whose roar can be heard from 3 blocks away. Leo's anger announces itself before it fully arrives, a bright flare on the horizon that makes people turn and watch. There is a specific music to a Leo's temper. It is not the staccato hiss of a sudden outburst, so much as the brass swell of 1,000 admirers who have stopped mid-cheer. Ruinous in spectacle, their fury is designed to be seen and acknowledged, and that theatricality is part of its function. When a Leo roars, the world is invited to witness the hurt of someone who believed themselves seen. To understand why a Leo's anger feels so large, you must first understand what Leo defends. They are custodians of dignity, of warmth, generosity, presence, and a self that has been practiced into brilliance. Much of a Leo's identity is performative in the most sincere sense. They cultivate a public style not out of vanity alone, but from a devotion to being fully themselves. When that carefully curated sense of self is disregarded, slighted, or laughed at, Leo's response is some mixture of dramatic recoil and clarifying proclamation. Their anger is, in effect, a demand for accurate mirrors. Leo's fury tends to operate in 2 distinct registers. The first is the immediate crescendo, a sharp exhale, a louder voice, a stance that appears to occupy space, as though to push the offense to the perimeter. This mode is visible and quick. It demolishes ambiguity and forces the issue into daylight. In many social contexts, this has value. Problems that would otherwise be swept under the rug get announced with clarity, and the offender cannot politely equivocate. The theatrical quality of the blow truncates excuses and demands a moral reckoning. The second register is quieter but no less formidable. When hurt is profound, Leo can choose to withdraw entirely, and the withdrawal itself is a kind of roar. It is the turning off of light and applause, an absence that echoes. They do not entreat. They perform absence as an intentional boundary. Where the first register draws attention through volume, the second draws attention through cold space. Both are communicative. Both are exact. The sudden silence that follows a Leo's retreat has a heavy gravity. Those who were accustomed to being held by their warmth discover, sometimes with stunned regret, that it had been a form of structure. The rebuke therefore functions both as punishment and as a demand for repair. Under the surface, most Leos rehearse their expression of discontent. Their words are often curated because presentation matters to them. This is not merely performative vanity, it is strategic generosity. Leo believes that if difficult truths must be told, they should be told in ways that preserve theater and thereby dignity. They will sometimes craft a confrontation the way an artist composes a piece, balance of tone, a chord of anger softened by a promise of possible restoration. That aesthetic approach can be a model of high-integrity communication when it is not misused for coercion. Still, the very traits that make Leo's anger effective can also make it hazardous. There is a risk that spectacle reduces accountability to optics. A public rebuke can secure immediate social correction without resulting in actual behavioral change. If apologies become ritualized gestures performed to extinguish the show, then the underlying patterns remain. Over time, this produces cynicism and hardens the Leo's pride into a brittle shell. Leos can then oscillate between theatrical persecution and haughty withdrawal, neither of which fosters genuine repair. Leos also tend to experience slights as scale problems. A missed compliment, a forgotten toast, or an unseen effort accumulates in their interior like pebbles on a sill, until one more pebble starts an avalanche. This cumulative model explains why what looks to others like a disproportionate reaction is often the end of a long series of small indignities. For people close to Leos, the task is preventive. Notice early, speak early, and recalibrate with gestures that match the scale of their investment: public gratitude, explicit credit, rituals of recognition. Those small repairs often prevent volcanic eruptions. Loving someone with leonine intensity means understanding that they are not merely dramatic for drama's sake. They treat relational life like an arena that deserves ceremony. If you have wronged a Leo publicly, a private wink won't suffice. Visible, sincere reparations, followed by consistent behavior, are what rebuild their trust. In that sense, the work of reconciliation with a Leo is both practical and theatrical. You must repair facts and restore an audience. In leadership contexts, a Leo's temper can be a catalytic force. Their vocal denunciation of injustice can shift organizational norms quickly, making them powerful advocates for accountability. But the same rapidity makes them vulnerable to accusations of theater, if structural follow-through is absent. An effective Leo leader pairs visible censure with silent, sustained work to change systems, public thunder, and private scaffolding. Interestingly, there is a generosity in many Leos' anger that is often overlooked. Once contrition is clear and consistent, they can be unexpectedly forgiving, sometimes magnanimous to a degree that surprises those who mistook their fury for mere ego. That magnanimity is part of the arc. The Leo's fury is aimed at restoring a mode of being where warmth is safe and visible again. They are inclined to return to spectacle if genuine repair has been undertaken. Practically, if you are trying to navigate conflict with a Leo, aim for clarity and public accountability where appropriate, and pair that with private acts of restitution. Avoid being performatively contrite. Leos see through cheap gestures, and instead build a sequence of consistent behaviors that demonstrate real change. If the offense was public, meet them on public terms when it comes to repair. If it was private, be explicit and generous in your apology. Do not try to out-drama them. Recognize the architectural nature of their pride and respond with steady, integrity-infused repair. Finally, Leo's roaring temper teaches an important lesson to the rest of us. Visibility matters. Many of us minimize slights because we fear escalation. Leos show that making a wound visible is sometimes the most honest path to mending it. Their roar demands presence and reparative action. If we can learn to accept this demand as a call for restoration rather than mere spectacle, we will find that their ferocity often clears the ground for generosity. The roar is loud, yes, but it can also be the clearing bell before new warmth is offered, the signal that a boundary has been redrawn, and a stage set for a wiser, more careful performance of love and respect. In short, a Leo's roar is a social instrument, frank, performative, and ultimately reparative when met with sincerity. Learn to listen to the music behind the shout. 5. Cancer, who weaponizes every secret you ever told them. Cancer's temper is not a fireworks display. It is a slow, precise accumulation that finally becomes a weapon because the wound has been cataloged and the inventory of injuries has been kept with care. To be on the receiving end of a Cancerian blow is to watch intimacy turned into evidence. The small confidences, the late-night conversations, the offhand admissions you thought were held sacred, each one can be retrieved and arranged into an argument so intimate that it feels like a betrayal in kind. Cancer stores relational memory the way archivists store scrolls. They remember patterns, accumulations, and the tiny details that prove a promise was broken. When their trust is injured, they do not always explode in the moment. Instead, they withdraw into a private vault of feelings and facts, and when they choose, they can open that vault and lay your missteps out with the cool, infuriating clarity of someone who has been keeping score not to punish, but to protect what is left of themselves. This method makes Cancer dangerous in ways that other tempers are not. Where Aries' fury scorches in the instant, and Taurus's wrath arrives as a seismic enforcement, Cancer's danger is the intimacy of the weapons. A Cancer doesn't generally seek spectacle, they seek moral balance. But because their currency is memory and closeness, their retaliation is uniquely piercing. They can expose things that you considered private and safe, and they do so not merely to wound, but to communicate an unignorable ledger. This is what betrayal cost me. In relationships, that revelation can feel like having your diary read aloud in a room where everyone waits for your collapse. The humiliation is not accidental. It is precisely the mechanism by which Cancer ensures the lesson is understood. To understand why a Cancer might use intimacy as leverage, you have to see it from their angle. Their emotional architecture is built around home, care, and safety. Secrets are the mortar of their trust structures. Shared vulnerabilities are how they know they are held. So when trust is broken, their defense instinct is not abstract retribution, but a practical remedy, to make clear the boundary and the consequence. Weaponized memory is, in this logic, a form of boundary enforcement. The cruelty is contextual. It is not mindless malice, but a calibrated attempt to prevent future hurt. That doesn't excuse the act, and it doesn't mean there aren't moments where a Cancer's reveal crosses lines into vindictiveness. But it does explain the strategy. Make the cost visible so that it cannot be repeated. The timing is often tactical. Cancer may wait until a moment when the revelation has maximal moral clarity, perhaps in a social setting where carelessness would be clearly and publicly exposed, or in a private conversation where the sting will prompt immediate reckoning. They know the context that will make the other person understand how deep the injury ran. That knowledge is terrifying because it is intimate expertise. The Cancerian doesn't need to shout. They can simply sit across from you, pull out the one message or the remembered promise, and let the quietness of implication do most of the damage. The sting comes not from volume, but from recognition. The other person realizes that something tender they assumed was forgotten has been held and used as proof. If you've been careless with a Cancer's confidence, repair is neither quick nor easy. Apology in the face of a Cancer's weaponized memory must be concrete, accountable, and patient. Words alone are thin unless paired with consistent change. Rebuilding requires time, rituals of return, and visible patterns of predictable behavior. Actions that demonstrate that the vault of trust can be filled again. Public gestures may be necessary when the injury was public. Private, repeated, humble acts are necessary when the wound was private. A Cancer will watch more than they will speak in the early phases of reparation. They are scouts of sincerity, not mere recipients of rhetoric. If forgiveness arrives, it is earned slowly and guardedly. For those who love a Cancer and want to avoid being the source of such a blow, the practical path is straightforward but not always easy. Respect confidences, don't trivialize the small promises, and understand that what might seem like an inconsequential remark can live in their memory for years. Small acts of attentiveness, checking in when you said you would, remembering the tiny things they care about, demonstrating through behavior that their emotional safety matters, accumulate into a bank of goodwill that prevents the need for archival retaliation. The key is foresight. Prioritize consistency over grand apologies, predictability over dramatic grand gestures. There is also a shadow to consider on Cancer's side. Because they so often operate through memory, it is possible for them to convert accumulated hurt into disproportionate responses if they do not have healthy outlets for processing. Housing grievances indefinitely is corrosive. It can make a person lean toward punitive reveals rather than facilitating repair. For Cancer themselves, cultivating practices that allow pain to be processed without weaponizing it is essential. Therapy, trusted confidants who can act as non-judgmental mirrors, ritualized closures. These are tools that prevent private inventories from becoming public arsenals. Learning to articulate pain before it hardens into a cache of evidence reduces the likelihood of a future blow that uses intimacy as a weapon. When filming or narrating a Cancer's temper, the most chilling sequences are not loud confrontations, but sequences that reveal juxtaposition. A tender domestic scene followed by the quiet revelation of a betrayal. A montage of small tokens. Texts, half-finished letters, a child's drawing tucked away, cut with a voiceover that slowly names the breach. The scariest moment is often the silence before the reveal, when the camera sits with the archive and the viewer feels the weight of accumulated hurt. Cancer's temper teaches a narrative lesson. The most dangerous weapons are sometimes the ones forged from love. At the same time, it's important to remember that Cancer's inclination to hold and to remember can be an extraordinary resource. In the right contexts, their memory keeps oaths alive, preserves histories, and binds communities together. Their sensitivity makes them fierce protectors of the vulnerable. The same meticulous care that can be turned into a sting can also be turned into steadfast loyalty. For anyone partnering with a Cancer, the invitation is to value that loyalty by being trustworthy, and to recognize that their capacity to remember is a form of care as powerful as any public declaration. Finally, in dealing with a Cancer's anger, 2 practical rules help. First, when you are in the wrong, own it without minimizing. Second, when you are rebuilding, be patient with the slow timeline of trust restoration. Do not expect immediate absolution. Accept that a Cancer's forgiveness is something they give cautiously because they have to protect their inner life. And if you are a Cancer watching yourself lean toward weaponization, try to reframe the ledger. Rather than collecting proof to use against someone, collect evidence of what you need to feel safe and use that as the basis for boundaries and constructive conversations. Transform archival impulses from punitive exhibitions into sober records that guide calm negotiation. In that reorientation, the power of memory becomes a tool for repair rather than a weapon for revenge. 4. Virgo, who dismantles your entire character with surgical precision. Virgo's temper does not arrive like a storm or a bomb. It arrives like a scalpel, silent, slow, and inexorably precise. Where other tempers make noise or gesture toward spectacle, Virgo's anger is procedural. It observes, categorizes, and then, with a clinician's calm, names the exact places where a person's armor is thin. The terrifying thing about being the target of a Virgo's ire is not always the content of their critique, but the manner of delivery. Factual, dispassionate, and unnervingly thorough. They do not shout to shame. They annotate. They do not raise their voice to intimidate. They lay out evidence. By the time the person sitting across from a furious Virgo understands the contours of the accusation, the structure of their projected self has already been pried apart. Each claim and excuse examined, each inconsistency cataloged, each self-justifying story cross-checked against behavior. The outcome is not always theatrical fury. It is the slow erosion of denials until only quiet, sometimes humiliating clarity remains. To understand why Virgo's anger is so disarming, consider what they worship: competence, clarity, reliability. For Virgo, moral worth and practical value are often indistinguishable. Sloppiness isn't merely an aesthetic irritation. It is a small moral failing because it creates avoidable harm. In relationships, workplaces, and projects, they prize the reduction of error. So when someone's behavior appears careless in a way that causes pain or inefficiency, Virgo experiences that carelessness as an affront. Their response is not sentimental. It is methodical. They compile examples. They compare stated intentions to actual outcomes. They are the person who can produce receipts for a pattern of neglect without even raising their voice. The precision of their critique is therefore both a gift, because it cuts through ambiguity, and a weapon, because it leaves very little room for plausible deniability. Virgo's dismantling is often executed in increments. It might begin with a tone of corrective curiosity. "Are you sure that's what happened?" and escalate into a sequence of observations that reveal a pattern: missed deadlines, small lies, repeated excuses. Each observation is a tile in a mosaic that, when completed, forms an image of consistent carelessness, or, worse, bad faith. The recipient often experiences a slow collapse. Something that felt defensible in fragments is suddenly indefensible when all the fragments are aligned. That is what makes Virgo's temper psychologically ruthless. It is not the one-line insult. It is the accumulation of coherent truth that the target is powerless to counter without reckoning with reality. There is an intellectual elegance to this form of anger. In its best expressions, Virgo's correction is aimed at refinement. Their eye for detail can save projects from disaster, expose sloppy reasoning in a debate, or prevent emotional harm by insisting on follow-through. The bee's sting of the critique can catalyze growth. The person who listens without reflexive defensiveness can learn and improve. Virgo's wrath, properly channeled, can be an instrument of accountability that raises standards and prevents recurrence. They often care deeply about doing things well because they care deeply about the people affected by incompetence. When that care is betrayed, their disappointment hardens into a clarity that looks and sounds like judgment. But this virtuous edge can dull quickly into cruelty when habit or fear takes over. Virgo's habit of noticing can become a habit of correcting, an automated response that mistakes persistent nitpicking for care. Over time, the accumulation of corrections can feel less like mentoring and more like harassment. The person on the receiving end may not only feel exposed, they may feel erased, as though their entire identity is being replaced by a string of deficiencies. That is the forensic terror of Virgo. The ability to take a beloved figure and map them into a catalog of shortcomings until the belovedness seems conditional on meeting an ever-moving bar of competence. Virgo's shadow also includes projection. They often assume that others should carry the same internal editor they themselves possess. When others do not, Virgo's response can be a form of moralized contempt, an unspoken assessment that the other is not trying hard enough. This moralizing is corrosive because it conflates a temperamental preference for order with an ethical hierarchy. It becomes especially damaging in intimate relationships, where the person being critiqued can feel perpetually corrected rather than supported. Over time, even small acts of correction, reminders about keys, comments about habits, editorial nudges, aggregate into a climate of inadequacy. Navigating a Virgo's ire therefore requires two related capacities: attentiveness to facts and boundary setting around tone. If you have erred, the fastest path through their anger is concrete evidence of reparative action, a corrected behavior, a documented change in process, a timeline of improvement. Virgo respects visible proof more than performative contrition. They want to see that the pattern has been altered. Conversely, if you find yourself under a stream of corrections that feel draining or shaming, ask for calibration. Request that feedback be scheduled, limited, or focused on specific goals rather than dispersed as a continuous commentary on your personhood. Virgo often responds to structure. Framing correction as a co-created improvement plan can turn an assault into collaboration. The emotional choreography of a Virgo anger scene is peculiar because it privileges the mind over the heart. The person delivering the critique may appear emotionally cool while brimming with disappointment. That dampened affect can make the recipient feel unheard or minimized. This is why compassionate translation matters. If you are a Virgo with a tendency to dismantle, preface difficult feedback with explicit statements of care. Acknowledging the relationship first can prevent corrective language from being perceived as total condemnation. "I care about you, and that's why I am saying this," is not a softening ploy. It is a contextual anchor that helps the other person receive what could otherwise feel like an erasure. Virgo's temper also plays out differently depending on context. In professional settings, their exactness can be invaluable. A Virgo team member spots the omission that could have sunk a launch, and their insistence on rigor spares everyone reputational damage. In creative or relational arenas, however, the same insistence can strangle spontaneity. Artists, partners, and collaborators may bristle at a constant demand for perfection. The healthy Virgo learns to discern when critique is necessary and when it is a compulsion. Tempering the editorial impulse with a tolerance for human messiness is a difficult but essential skill for Virgos who want their precision to be an aid rather than a weapon. Filmically, Virgo's dismantling is compelling because it is a process rather than a moment. The camera lingers on small acts, a list being crossed out, a hand annotating a diary, a watchful pair of eyes, the quiet rearrangement of evidence. Build tension with time-lapse sequences that show patterns forming, then reveal the confrontation as a clean, articulate speech that lands like a verdict. The most chilling visual is often the calm face of the critic, juxtaposed with the gradual deflation of the accused. That slow deflation carries a heavier emotional punch than an immediate shouting match. It implies a lifetime of corrections compacted into one devastating verdict. For those who love a Virgo, the practical advice is simple and humane. Accept their standards not as an attack, but as a perspective, and ask them to practice gentleness. Say aloud what you need. "I want to improve. Can we set one small goal?" This channels their impulse into collaborative scaffolding rather than unilateral judgment. Ask for affirmation alongside critique. Let them know when their precision feels like care and when it feels like pressure. Virgo's loyalty is often fierce. They want things to be right because they want you to be well. If that love is named first, their corrections can feel supportive rather than surgical. Finally, a word for Virgos themselves. The archive of critiques you carry is a gift when used to refine and repair, but it becomes a prison when it is used to police loved ones into a perpetual state of becoming. Learn to hold standards lightly and people tenderly. Notice when your inner editor becomes an instrument of control, rather than a tool for improvement. Practice offering praise that is specific and frequent. Praise arrives like a counterbalancing balm that reduces the likelihood your corrections will be absorbed as erasure. In the end, Virgo's greatest promise is the cultivation of better lives through attention to detail. May their scalpel carve out care rather than carve away the soul. 3. Taurus, who remains calm until they suddenly see red. Taurus's temper is a study in deceptive calmness. At first glance, it is the slow, steady warmth of a hearth, reliable, comforting, seemingly immune to sudden gusts. People trust the Taurus pace because it feels rooted. They move with deliberation, they speak with measured tones, and they create environments that signal safety. Familiar routines, stable meals, a predictable cadence to their days. That very steadiness is why their anger, when it finally arrives, is so disorienting. The Taurus builds tolerance like sediment. Small slights, careless words, unmet promises. These things do not ricochet off them so much as sink into the strata of a patient interior. Over time, the layers thicken, and what looks like placidity from the outside is actually a reservoir. When that reservoir reaches capacity, the release is not necessarily loud in theatrical terms, but it is seismic in consequence. The person who mistook the slow flow for endless forgiveness is often the most surprised by the sudden cliff edge their Taurus partner presents. There is method to this accumulation. Taurus assesses risk to the things they value: home, routine, physical comfort, loyalty, by watching patterns. A missed commitment is not evaluated only for its immediate offense. It is read in context. Is this an exception or part of a pattern that threatens the steady life they've built? Because Taurians prize continuity, they often attempt repair in quiet ways first. Practical fixes, small reminders, gestures that restore balance without stridency. They assume goodwill because they themselves tend to act from steadiness. But if the offenses keep coming, their approach changes from patient repair to decisive action. The see red moment is often the point at which innumerable private attempts at correction have failed, and the Taurus realizes that only a firm boundary or an irreversible change will prevent further harm. That decisiveness has a kind of authority. It is not dramatic for its own sake, but functional, a last resort enforcement of the life they will no longer tolerate being eroded. What a Taurus does when pushed over the threshold is instructive. Their anger frequently manifests as concrete, irreversible choices rather than theatrical tirades. They might remove someone from a shared space, take control of financial levers, refuse intimacy, or restructure daily patterns in ways that make the cost of continued disregard plain. In other words, their response is proportionate to the slow accrual of grievances. The solution they enact is often durable because it is designed to prevent recurrence. This practical finality is terrifying because it can feel like betrayal to the person who expected slow correction rather than a hard line. Where Aries' explosion asks for immediate change through shock, Taurus's decisive moves enforce change by altering the lived reality around the transgression. There is also an emotional logic behind Taurus's calm. They are not numb, they are conserving. For many Taurians, fury is a last act of protection for things they love deeply. Their attachments run deep: food, place, ritual, children, long friendships, and the decision to sever or punish is inextricably tied to the desire to preserve what remains. This is why the aftermath of a Taurus temper can be both chilling and comprehensible. The punishments are not gratuitous snipes, but calibrated measures intended to shore up stability. In their sternest form, these measures act as a kind of triage. Eliminate the factor that threatens the ecosystem and replant the garden with care. The pragmatic logic can be salutary. Sometimes the structural change a Taurus enforces prevents ongoing erosion that would have eventually destroyed the relationship or the household. However, the same strengths create predictable weaknesses. Because Taurians can be so patient, slights sometimes accumulate unseen until the corrective measure is outsized in the eyes of others. People who are more emotionally volatile may prefer immediate confrontation, and then a fast resolution. With Taurus, the problem is stealth accumulation, which can produce outcomes that seem disproportionate, because the visible act is only the tip of an iceberg of neglected grievances. For partners, friends, or coworkers, the preventive work is simple in description, but challenging in practice. Attend to the slow, mundane signals of care. Acknowledge small commitments, maintain honor around routine promises, and do not assume that silence indicates permission. Emotional labor for Taurus is often expressed as practical reliability. Reciprocate with the same steadiness and the chances of a sudden see-red moment drop dramatically. Taurus's temperament also instructs us about repair. If you are the one who has crossed a line, apology alone will often not suffice. You must demonstrate continuity, the hard, boring labor of changed behavior. Offer practical restitution. Reinstate the routine you broke. Replace what was damaged. Create a plan that shows you understand how the pattern emerged and how it will stop. Taurus reads change in the texture of everyday life. It is the small, repeated acts, showing up on time, keeping a promise about chores, honoring a budget, that rebuild the trust they measure by habit. Grand gestures can be useful as signposts, but without sustained follow-through, they are often read as noise. Repair for Taurus is therefore an argument made through the accumulation of reliable acts, not one dramatic speech. On camera, the drama of a Taurus temper is best communicated through contrast. Begin with lingering, warm shots of shared domesticity, the slow stirring of coffee, a hand smoothing a tablecloth, the quiet rigor of small rituals. Layer in the small breaches, a forgotten anniversary text, a bill unpaid, a promise postponed. Let the audience watch the sediment accumulate in ordinary objects, then cut to the decisive moment, a suitcase packed, a bank card removed, a locked door. The shock comes not from volume, but from the cold clarity of the gesture. Sound design can underscore this. Long, soft tones during accumulation, a single, low note at the moment of enforcement. Cinematically, the scariest thing about Taurus is that the aftermath is tidy and resolute. The person who once resented the noise now must live in the quieter but enforced new order. In relationships, the ethical lesson Taurus offers is that patience is not permission. Longevity requires maintenance. It is possible to love steadily and still demand respect for the systems that support that love. For those who love a Taurus, the invitation is to respect the small seams of life as sacred and to assume responsibility for the daily promises you make. For Taurians themselves, the task is to practice earlier, softer forms of boundary setting. Name the discomfort before it hardens into sediment. Practice small confrontations rather than saving all corrective energy for a final enforcement. A middle way, early notice plus fair consequence, prevents the seismic shock that hurts both parties. Finally, consider the moral irony of Taurus's rage. What terrifies observers most is often what keeps them safe. Decisive people who will act to preserve the conditions of care. The danger is not their willingness to enforce boundaries, but the surprise people feel when decades of small tolerances are met with a single, irrevocable decision. If you understand the arithmetic of their patience, you can see their final move not as cruelty, but as a difficult but honest attempt to secure the life they value. In learning to heed the quiet warnings, we teach the calm not to become a reservoir that bursts. We teach it instead to be the steady, responsive presence it was always meant to be. 2. Scorpio, who waits for years to deliver a lethal blow. Scorpio's temper is feared not because it is loud, but because it is patient. Where other signs react, Scorpio remembers. Where others discharge anger to feel relief, Scorpio preserves it, studies it, and allows it to mature. Their wrath is not an impulse, it is a long game. To be wronged by a Scorpio is to enter a quiet countdown you may not even know has begun. They do not announce the start of this process. They continue to smile, to engage, to listen. But somewhere beneath the surface, a ledger has been opened, and every interaction from that point forward is weighed against the original betrayal. This is why Scorpio's temper is so terrifying. By the time the blow arrives, it is no longer anger alone. It is strategy, memory, timing, and precision fused into a single act. Scorpio's relationship with anger is inseparable from their relationship with trust. Trust for them is not casual, it is sacred, costly, and rare. When they offer it, they do so with full emotional exposure, often revealing parts of themselves that others never get access to. Because of this, betrayal is not merely disappointing, it is existential. It shakes the structure of meaning they built around the relationship. Scorpio does not respond to this rupture with immediate confrontation unless the situation demands it. More often, they retreat inward, sealing the wound and studying its shape. The retreat is not weakness, it is incubation. What makes Scorpio dangerous is their emotional intelligence. They understand motivations, vulnerabilities, and power dynamics with unsettling accuracy. They remember not just what you did, but why you did it, how you justified it, and where it intersects with your fears and desires. Over time, this understanding becomes a map. Scorpio knows when you are most exposed, when your credibility is highest, when your defenses are lowest, and they wait. Not out of sadism, but because timing determines whether the truth will land as a bruise or as a fatal wound. Scorpio prefers the latter when they feel irreparably wronged. The lethal blow is rarely physical, and often not dramatic. It might be a revelation delivered to exactly the right audience. It might be the sudden withdrawal of loyalty that had been quietly sustaining you. It might be the exposure of a contradiction you hoped no one noticed, brought forward at the precise moment it cannot be explained away. The power of the blow lies in its inevitability. When it lands, it feels less like an attack and more like a verdict. The Scorpio does not shout. They present. And the presentation carries the weight of years. Part of what makes this so devastating is that Scorpio often appears unchanged until the moment of action. They do not telegraph their intentions. There are no escalating warnings, no dramatic confrontations that allow the other person to course correct. From the outside, everything seems fine. This false stability lulls people into carelessness. They assume forgiveness where there is only patience. They assume amnesty where there is only surveillance. When the blow comes, the shock is total because it collapses the illusion retroactively. Suddenly, every quiet moment looks like preparation. Yet it is important to understand that Scorpio does not seek destruction for pleasure. Their aim is closure and control. They want to ensure that the harm they experience cannot be repeated, and that the moral balance is restored. In their mind, a clean, decisive end is preferable to ongoing vulnerability. This is why their actions often feel absolute. Once Scorpio decides to act, there is rarely negotiation. The relationship, role, or alliance is redefined permanently. They are not interested in partial repair when trust has been fundamentally violated. This absolutism is both Scorpio's strength and their curse. It allows them to survive betrayal with dignity intact, but it can also trap them in cycles of revenge that prevent healing. Holding anger for years has a cost. The emotional energy required to maintain vigilance can harden into cynicism, making it difficult to trust again, even when circumstances change. For Scorpio, the challenge is learning when preservation becomes poisoning, when the desire for a perfect reckoning delays the possibility of peace. For those who interact closely with Scorpios, the rules are stark but fair. Do not betray them casually. Do not assume silence equals forgiveness. And if you have caused harm, address it immediately and thoroughly. Scorpio respects directness and accountability, far more than charm or excuses. A sincere confrontation early can prevent years of quiet escalation. What they cannot tolerate is denial, gaslighting, or minimization. Those behaviors do not diffuse their anger. They refine it. For Scorpios themselves, there is a moral crossroads embedded in their temper. Their capacity for insight and timing could be used not only for retaliation, but for transformation. The same skills that allow them to dismantle someone at the perfect moment also allow them to understand systems of harm deeply enough to change them. When Scorpio channels their intensity into creation rather than destruction, they become formidable healers, investigators, and leaders. But that requires releasing the fantasy that justice must always be devastating to be real. Visually and narratively, Scorpio's anger is best portrayed through restraint. Long pauses, close shots of eyes observing, calendars turning, messages archived. The audience should feel the weight of time passing, the slow tightening of a net. When the moment of action arrives, it should be quiet and final. A sentence spoken once, a door closed without a slam, access revoked without explanation. The horror is not in the violence, but in the certainty. Ultimately, Scorpio's temper teaches a hard truth. Some people do not forget, and some wounds do not fade with time. In a world that often encourages quick apologies and surface reconciliation, Scorpio reminds us that trust is structural, not sentimental. Break it deeply enough and no amount of noise will save you when the silence finally decides to act. 1. Aries, who explodes like a grenade at the slightest irritation. Aries' temper is immediate, incendiary, and unapologetically physical in its energy. It does not creep in quietly or calculate its entrance. It detonates. 1 second the air is clear, the next it is filled with heat, noise, and shrapnel. This is why Aries sits at the top of the list. Their anger is not about memory or strategy or moral accounting. It is about ignition. Something irritates them, blocks them, contradicts them, or challenges their momentum, and the reaction is instant. There is no incubation period. There is no quiet processing. The match is struck and the explosion follows before anyone has time to move out of range. Aries experiences the world in real time. Emotion for them is not something to be stored or examined later. It is something to be expressed now. This gives them extraordinary vitality. They are often the first to act in a crisis, the first to defend, the first to confront injustice when others are still weighing social consequences. But this same immediacy makes their temper terrifying. When irritation appears, Aries does not ask whether the moment is appropriate or whether the audience is safe. Their nervous system surges forward, flooding the body with adrenaline. Voices rise, gestures sharpen, words fly without rehearsal. The blast is honest, but honesty without containment can be destructive. What makes Aries' anger particularly dangerous is not only its intensity, but its unpredictability. Because Aries can be warm, playful, and generous moments before an outburst, others often lower their guard around them. The shift from laughter to fury can feel like whiplash. There may be no visible buildup, no warning signs others can learn to read. One careless remark, one perceived delay, one tone that feels dismissive, and the grenade goes off. People around Aries often describe the sensation as walking through a room where the floor might suddenly collapse. The uncertainty keeps everyone alert, sometimes anxious, sometimes compliant. Unlike Scorpio or Taurus, Aries does not explode because of accumulated grievances. They explode because something in the present moment feels intolerable. That might be disrespect, inefficiency, hesitation, or a challenge to their authority or competence. Aries has a deep intolerance for obstruction. They want movement, clarity, and forward motion, and anything that slows that momentum can feel like an existential threat. Their temper is therefore closely linked to their identity as initiators and leaders. When blocked, they feel diminished, and anger becomes a way to reclaim agency instantly. The aftermath of an Aries explosion is often chaotic. Words spoken in the heat of the moment cannot be unsaid. Doors may be slammed. Messages sent cannot be recalled. Relationships can fracture not because of long-term malice, but because of short-term combustion. And then, just as suddenly, the fire may be gone. Aries often cools down as fast as they ignite. They may genuinely not understand why others are still shaken when, to them, the moment has passed. This mismatch in emotional timing is one of the most difficult aspects of loving or working with an Aries. For them, the explosion was release. For others, it was trauma. There is a tragic irony here. Aries is not usually cruel by intention. Their anger is rarely premeditated. They do not typically seek revenge or long-term domination. In fact, many Aries feel deep remorse after an outburst, especially once they see the damage. But remorse does not erase impact. The pattern can become cyclical: irritation, explosion, apology, reset, until the people around them begin to feel unsafe, even during calm periods, anticipating the next detonation. In relationships, Aries temper can create a dynamic of walking on eggshells. Partners may learn to self-censor, to rush decisions, or to placate quickly in order to avoid triggering an outburst. This shifts power subtly, but significantly. Over time, the relationship begins to orbit the Aries' emotional volatility rather than mutual regulation. That is where the real danger lies. Not in any single explosion, but in the atmosphere of hypervigilance it creates. The room becomes organized around avoiding ignition rather than fostering honesty. For Aries themselves, the work is not about extinguishing fire. That fire is the source of their courage, passion, and leadership. The work is about containment. Learning to pause between stimulus and response is not natural for Aries. It must be trained deliberately. Even a few seconds of delay can radically change outcomes. A breath, a step back, a phrase like, "I need a minute," instead of an accusation. These small buffers act like blast shields, reducing collateral damage without suppressing the underlying force. Healthy Aries learn to channel anger into action rather than attack. Physical movement, exercise, or task-oriented outlets can dissipate excess adrenaline before it turns into verbal or emotional shrapnel. They benefit from environments where directness is welcomed, but boundaries are clear, places where they can speak forcefully without dominating or terrorizing. When Aries feels respected and unblocked, their anger transforms into decisive leadership rather than destruction. For those dealing with an Aries temper, clarity and firmness matter more than submission. Aries respect strength. Calm, direct boundaries delivered without escalation can interrupt the explosion mid-flight. What does not work is passive resistance or emotional manipulation. That only fuels the fire. Naming behavior clearly. "This is too much. I'm stepping away." And following through consistently teaches Aries that explosions have consequences, not control. Visually, Aries' temper is all kinetic energy. Quick cuts, sudden movements, a raised voice breaking silence, a hand slamming a table. But it is equally important to show the aftermath. The empty room, the unanswered message, the moment when the adrenaline fades and the cost becomes visible. That contrast is the true story of Aries' anger. The blaze and the ashes. Ultimately, Aries' temper is terrifying because it is pure force without filtration. It reminds us how thin the line is between passion and destruction. When guided, that force builds movements, protects the vulnerable, and cuts through stagnation. When unchecked, it burns bridges faster than they can be rebuilt. Aries teaches the hardest lesson of all the zodiac tempers. Power without pause is not strength, it is volatility. And learning when not to explode is the most difficult battle an Aries will ever fight. So now I want to know, which zodiac temper scares you the most and why? Have you experienced one of these firsthand, or do you recognize your own sign in this list? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoy deep psychological astrology like this, subscribe to Zodiac Signs TV and turn on notifications. More videos like this are coming.